this is Spook with Emma. I'm Emma, and today I wanted to talk about a book that was recommended by Kendall Jenner on her Instagram, and it's this one, The Houseguest by Amparo Dávila. It's a book of short stories, and Amparo Dávila is a Mexican author. She was born in 1920 and she died quite recently. She is a very interesting author. All of her stories are horror, more psychological horror than anything else, but they're very unsettling, very, very good. She also had quite a traumatic start to her life. So she was one of 4 siblings, but she was the only one who survived childhood. I couldn't find out too many details, but I believe one of her, I think they were all brothers, I'm not 100% sure, but I think one of her brothers died quite soon after being born. One died at age 4 of meningitis, and one brother died of, I think, of cancer, and it might have been when he was 7. I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't find loads of information about this, but she was brought up kind of as an only child, but obviously knowing that she wasn't an only child, and I think that's something that has influenced these stories. One writer who was a big fan of Amparo Dávila was Julio Cortázar. He actually, on the front of the book, they have an endorsement that he gave, obviously not recently due to being dead, but he read one of her collections and then he got in touch with her via her publisher and wrote to her saying how brilliant that he thought she was. And that started a friendship between them. He at one point said she was close to perfect in her work. And one of the stories in here is dedicated to Cortázar and his wife at the time. So there was a very close association between them. And I think that if you are a fan of Cortázar, you would probably like these. I would say they are all horror, but they are more of the unsettling type of horror, not so much. There are no jump scares in this. It's more of kind of a creepy, slow burn and a feeling of not being able to escape, so quite claustrophobic. There are 12 stories in this collection. The first half of the stories roughly are about monsters, and then the second half is more about madness. I didn't think there was one bad story in this. They were all very good, and they all are quite different, so it's not as though if you've read one of them you can predict what happens in the others. I enjoyed that they were all quite different from each other, even though you can tell they're the same author. In fact, some of the madness second half, I would have believed you if you told me it was Shelley Jackson. Very similar to Shelley Jackson. I'll go into a bit of detail on a few of them, so there might be some spoilers, so just watch out if you don't want spoilers. One of the ones I really liked was called End of a Struggle, and that is about a man who is just going about his day and he sees himself, not a lookalike, himself, but the him that he sees and he follows himself around has a better life. He has the girlfriend that this man always wanted. It reminded me a lot of Gogol's The Nose, which I think is one of the best short stories ever. In The Nose, if you haven't read it, it's a man who wakes up one morning and his nose is gone, and he is obviously quite embarrassed and he's going around with a scarf over his face, and then he bumps into his nose, and his nose is a higher rank than him. And it's all quite crazy because then in another part of town there's a man who's opening his bread roll for breakfast and there's a nose in it, and he keeps trying to dispose of this nose, and then people are following him saying, oh, excuse me, I think you dropped your package. And this one just reminded me, just the premise of it reminded me of The Nose. I really liked that one. Another highlight was The Houseguest. That's, I would say, her most famous story, I think, in English. It's the only one I'd read before. It's about a woman whose husband is away a lot and he invites a guest to stay. He's not a very good husband. He's not very nice to her. And she says a lot that she is afraid of the guest. She doesn't want him in the house, but the husband is like, it's fine. Why are you complaining? Just do what I say type thing. But because the husband is away a lot, she's often alone in the house. Well, she has children, she has a housekeeper, and they're alone with the house guest. And she's just terrified of him and she's terrorized by him. The house guest is always kind of stalking her, creeping around, creeping up on her, just being generally menacing, sometimes watching her sleep, and she just is really terrified. She has to run her whole life around him because if she doesn't do what he wants, he gets angry. and I won't say what happens at the end, but the house guest in this is kind of a character or a presence that's repeated throughout some of the stories when I'm talking about the monster stories. It's never explained who or what the house guest is. There are a few kind of clues, like I think she says he has yellow protruding eyes and he's very big and very strong. But it's not even clear if this is a person, if it's an animal, and that's, I think, deliberate. Even in this story, the narrator says, Guadalupe and I never referred to him by name. It seemed to us that doing so would lend greater reality to that shadowy being. So it's a deliberate technique. This creature is not named. There's one story where a woman actually names the creature that is haunting her, and it's a toad. And as soon as she says it's a toad, she kind of loses credibility with the man that she's talking to and telling him about what's happening to her. So it's almost better for her to not say what it is. I think as well that this is meant to be kind of a universal thing. So it could mean one thing to one reader and another thing to somebody else. And I know lots of people look for clues about, is it a cat? Is it a tiger? Is it a dog? Is it a person? But it really doesn't matter because it's what it symbolizes. There is a lot of being afraid to sleep. There is a lot of not being able to think about anything else and being so scared of what's going to happen. And if you think about a standard ghost story, someone being haunted, it's often during the day they try and act normal and don't tell anyone because people think they're crazy. And then at night they can't sleep because they're terrified because they're being haunted by something in their house. So I think it's deliberately ambiguous because it doesn't actually matter what the house guest is or who the house guest is, because it's the effect that's the important part of the story. And us not knowing what we're afraid of is scarier. And I think in general in life, when we're afraid of something, if we don't know quite what it is that we're afraid of, and it's that shadowy being like the narrator in the house guest says, it's more terrifying because we don't quite know what we're afraid of. So whatever we are scared of is what the monster represents. In the house guest, they do try and fight back against the monster, the house guest. Another one that was interesting is the first story, which is called Moses and Gaspar. It's quite weird, actually, the translation of the names. So Moses is translated into English, Gaspar is not. Loads of the names have the accents, like Julian, Maria, but then others like Monica, they take the accent off in the translation. It's kind of weird. Anyway, Moses and Gaspar is about a man, his brother dies and he inherits Moses and Gaspar. Again, we don't know are they cats, are they people, it doesn't matter. This man takes on caring for Moses and Gaspar. He takes them to his apartment. They start causing all kinds of havoc. So as soon as they're not being looked after, when the man goes out for work, for example, they're screaming the house out, all the neighbours complain. He gets forced out of where he lives. He's not allowed to stay there because there are so many complaints. Because he can't really leave them, he also has to give up the work that he does. He has a kind of girlfriend situation. He has to stop seeing her because she comes around and they terrorize her in an unspecified way. And in the end, he resigns himself that he is just going to have to allow his life to be controlled by them, just cut himself off and isolate himself from everybody. And it kind of implies that maybe he'll be killed as well. Like maybe they killed his brother or drove him to his death, and then maybe the narrator is the next one who's going to be killed. Another one that is along the monster theme that I found really, really interesting is The Cell. And that is about a young woman who is being haunted. And again, she can't tell her family. There's just a he who comes into her room at night and terrorizes her. She can't explain it to anyone. She can't get help from anyone. And then she comes up with an idea of getting married to this man. So there's a man called, I think he's called Jose Juan, and she starts giving him some attention, and then they get engaged, and she thinks this is going to be her escape from whatever is kind of terrorizing her. But actually, this man really annoys her, so she doesn't really like spending time with him. He really grates on her. She's kind of almost thinking, is the haunting or, whatever is terrorizing her, is that less bad than being married to him? But she goes through with the wedding. The last paragraph is, now too time has stopped. What a cold, dark room. It's so dark that day merges with night. I no longer know when the days begin or end. And then it goes on talking about her family. Maybe they're already dead and their eyes are open and shining like Jose Juan's that night. I wanted to close his eyes. It scared me to have them staring at me. His eyes were open very wide, shining brightly. And then further on, Jose Juan got cold, very cold. I didn't let him fall, but rather let him slip down gently. He was bathed in moonlight and his eyes were staring. The rat's eyes are staring too. He went to sleep on the grass beneath the moon. He was very white. I was watching him for a long time. I'd like to lean out of that window and be able to see the other rooms. I can't reach it. It's very high and he could come at any moment and catch me, since he comes any time, as often as he wants. He could get angry and beat me. That noise in the corner, it's another mouse. I'll catch it before he arrives, since once he comes I won't be able to do anything. So it seems from that, or my reading of it, is that she has killed Jose Juan. It seems like he fell to his death, and now she is in either a prison or maybe a secure unit. But it hasn't helped her because the he that was coming to her at night before now can come anytime. So she's basically tried to escape one prison and ended up in another prison. I liked that one as well. I liked that she tried to do something different. When there are these different stories that have these kind of monsters in them, the protagonist doesn't always have the same reaction or do the same thing. So maybe they resign themselves, maybe they try and get around it somehow, maybe they try and get rid of the monster. They do different things, they try different things. So it's not repetitive in that sense, but there is kind of a gloom cast over everything, because it does seem like whatever you do, you can't escape these things. And I think that really links back to the psychological and trauma aspect, that you can't just think, okay, well, I'll ignore it. Okay, I'll move. There is not an easy solution. So I thought that was really interesting. I really like them. And I think that they could really be interpreted in so many ways, and that they can link to any kind of fear that we have. Whatever it is that to us is the scariest thing, we can read these stories and that's what it will mean to us. So I thought that was really interesting. I really liked all the stories. They did, some of them actually remind me a little bit of Horacio Quiroga, who was a Uruguayan writer who was writing way before Amparo Dávila and still is extremely well known. He wrote a lot about kind of death and horror, and especially the stories that are about young women and getting married and things reminded me a little bit of his story, The Feather Pillow, which is about a young woman who gets married, and as soon as she gets married and goes to live with the husband, she starts getting ill. So she loses a lot of strength and she's just getting more and more ill, but no one really knows what's wrong with her. But of course, because she's ill and feeling tired all the time, she spends more time resting in bed. And I won't spoil the ending of that one, but it's good. So overall, I really like this collection. There were none of the stories I didn't like. There was one that probably is the least scary one, but resonated with me, about someone who is tormented by snails when they cook snails to make escargot, and he's tormented by the screaming of the snails. Kind of Edgar Allan Poe-ish. But I once killed a slug with salt and it was the worst thing I ever did. I was living in a house share in the Lake District and it was built kind of into a hill. So in the kitchen at the back, there used to be loads of creatures coming. It was horrible. And once there was a slug on the kitchen floor and I thought, oh, I know what kills slugs, salt. But I kind of thought, well, sprinkle some salt, the slug will be dead, everything's fine. No, it's a horrific death for the slug because it dehydrates it from the outside in. So it's dying this horrible death. I put the salt on, it stood up on its tail, and it did this really high pitch, like, And I was like, oh no, this is not what I expected to happen. I thought it would be dead. It took ages to die. It was absolutely horrible. Then I was like, well, what do? I can't save it because, you know, the salt's already there. It's drying out. What do I do? Then I was like, maybe I'll put more salt so at least it dies quicker. Anyway, it was horrible and I really regret doing that. So I think the salt is probably recommended to put in your gardens to repel the slugs, maybe. Don't put it directly on the slug. Well, it does kill it. So I guess I achieved my goal, but it was horrible and still traumatized, really. I would never do that again. So I don't recommend killing slugs with salt, and I can understand why a narrator might be tormented by escargot and the sounds of the screaming snails. Anyway, I really liked this book. I recommend it. I tried to see if Kendall Jenner had said anything specific about why she liked the book. I don't think she did, but she was just pictured with it. Weirdly, she has loads of post-it notes in there, so I don't know if she's writing herself notes, if someone else is writing her notes about the book. I'm not sure. Especially when she's reading by the pool, I wouldn't find it relaxing to have stacks of post-it notes and be having to write myself notes, but I guess maybe that's how she does it. But definitely a good recommendation from Kendall Jenner. Also, Dakota Johnson, I hadn't seen this when I did the review, but Dakota Johnson recommended The Lamb by Lucy Rose. So again, another excellent recommendation from a celebrity. Okay, thank you for watching and I will see you next time. Bye.